Thank you. It's good to see all of you. Well, to see many of you. I see some names, and I see quite a few people, and it's a great pleasure and an honor. I don't know, maybe some of you, well, probably most of you saw the title for the talk, which was Theosis, Sexual Purity, Mental Health, and the Light of God. And I have to tell you that this is a topic that, fair to say, I've never felt more inadequate to the task, more inadequate to the theme. Why then do I talk about it? I hide behind the probable misinterpretation that I give to the words of the Apostle Paul when he said, I believed and therefore I spoke. I don't I don't know. I have not attained theosis. I haven't attained any of the things that are listed there. I have not seen the light of God directly. Um, I don't have a pure heart. I don't have mental health at the level we're supposed to as humans. But I believe in the one who achieves all of this for us. And to live in the light of the resurrection and to be able to proclaim Christ in the light, to be able to proclaim the crucified and risen Christ is the greatest privilege we have in this life. And so I'm going to stand before you as one wrestling about all of these matters. And hopefully my goal, my dream is that I'll have something to say, that I'll become a channel of something useful to say that you can bring into your own households, and that can help you nourish your own children toward theosis. Now, you might you might be thinking, um, what would possess you to talk about this in the first place? And the truth behind it is that I was asked to speak at St. Ticon's, and about the topic there was inspiring a vision for sexual purity in our youth. And so what I did in preparation for that was I knew if I was going to talk about that topic, I was going to have to do some research. So I went to the ladies at church and out on at the picnic tables, and I asked them, why would you stay sexually pure until you're married? It was a very interesting response, although I won't say surprising. What they indicated was two things. One is that they did it out of fear, primarily fear of dad, which I thought was quite interesting. And they also, one of them in particular, said that her father had presented such a high and beautiful conception of sex within marriage that she wanted to stay pure for that. I liked that a lot. That's the inspiration side. And I felt obligated when I was giving that talk to focus on the inspiration side. I'm going to do that today too. I'm not going to be talking very much about the protective side, which you also need to be attentive to. And here I mean in relation to theosis or mental health or sexual purity or the light of God. There's a certain defensive thing we need to do as parents, isn't there? There's a wall we need to build around our children to prevent the evil one from attacking them. I'm not going to address that directly. I'm going to speak more positively about, well, more about the positive things that we can and should do. Although I'm going to begin with a qualifier to all of that. The word devil in English is a fascinating word. As I understand, subject to correction, but as I understand it, the word devil comes from a Greek word, diabolos. Diabole being that's my terribly anglicized 21st century way of saying it in the North Carolina. Diabole, which as I understand it, the word bole means something like to toss. So we actually get our word bowl from it, not bowl that you eat out of, but bowl when you go bowling. So that's almost the same as the Greek word. And then dia is a prefix, so it can, or a preposition, so it can mean almost anything you want. But fundamentally, what diabole seems to literally mean, and as close as you can get to literal, is to toss apart, to toss things apart. Hyperbole, would mean to toss over. Hyper goes into the Latin as super, so hyperbole almost literally means Super Bowl. Um, it's the idea of tossing over, tossing beyond. So when we talk about diabole and the devil and who he is and what his function is, the essential task that the devil engages in is division. Now understand, that doesn't mean that division is always bad. In Genesis 1:1, in Genesis 1 chapter, we see God dividing things, don't we? We see him dividing and combining, but he's always doing it to bless, always doing it to give life, always doing it so that things can be better at what they are. Let me put it this way. He's always doing it for the glory of the thing he is dividing. With the devil, it is the exact opposite. He is creating division to destroy, to kill, to maim. And what happens then is he divides Adam and Eve. He divides Eve against herself and Adam against himself. And what does he bring in? Death. And he does it by division. But this is where the reflection comes in as far as, this whole talk. The reflection that I'm dwelling on in this talk is, how does the devil, the serpent, how does he come to a person who isn't a sinner, who doesn't have impure desires, and get her to sin? Have you ever thought about how hard that would be? Have you ever thought about how clever and cunning he would have to be to do that? Now, that leads me straight to my fundamental thesis in this talk. So I'll tell it to you right now, and then get on to the talk itself. My thesis is this: that God has breathed into human nature, the human soul, one desire that is the one thing needful, and that is the desire that, let me add one more thing. That desire governs every desire that we have, but we do everything in our power to veil it, and that is the desire to be united with him, the desire to be one with him, the desire to be like him. There's a number of ways to think about it, but it's the desire for theosis. I'm going to go so far as to say the only thing you really want, and the only thing your children really want, is theosis. So much so that anything else you ever get is unsatisfying. You ever notice that? You can get all the glory in the world, all the money in the world. We're never satisfied. You can eat the best meal that ever was placed on the table, and you're done with it, you're not satisfied. You're going to be hungry again, in fact, our Lord tells us. But theosis, that's the one thing, that's the one inescapable desire, the one thing needful. But theosis can be refracted. Think of a rainbow, right? A rainbow is made of light, right? And light is, when it's simple, it's beautiful, but it's clear. I can see, for example, in some of the images on the screen that behind you are windows with light shining through, or behind you are walls with light shining on them, right? And the light is perfectly clear. It's pure, it's radiant, right? But if it shines through water, or if it shines through the atmosphere and it's just finished raining, then we see that light refracted. Now, it's still one light, isn't it? But we see it as red and orange and yellow and green and blue and indigo and violet. We see 7 different colors of the rainbow, but they're all the same light. And what I want to propose to you is that that's how our desires work. That we have one desire, and that's to know God, to be one with God, to be like him, to be united with him. But that desire can be refracted, like the colors of the rainbow, into, I would suggest for this talk, 6 separate and identifiable, not separate, 6 identifiable desires, all of which are capable, in the hands of the evil one, of being divided from the other desires. Okay, you see the significance of that. There are 6 desires, But if they're all united in one, they're one desire. But if you take one desire and you put it in conflict with another desire, you've just shattered the soul of the person who welcomes or accepts that division. Now, where we are, we're on the other side of the fall. And so for us, those desires are all divided. We can think that we actually want these things separately. We can be so hungry for one of these things that we ignore the others and never discover that the true satisfaction of our desire is God himself, right? So what I want to do in this talk is to present what those 6 desires are with brief comments about specifically how they relate to the matter of sexual purity, and then how they relate to matters of mental health, and how they relate to the light of God. I'll probably have the least to say about the last point, partly because of time and partly because of ignorance. I want to read 2 quotations to you as I get, well, I'll just read one to you right now as I get started. And this is from Saint Athanasius's book, the one that Father John Bear wrote the introduction to, on the Incarnation. And there's a wonderful translation of it with the C.S. Lewis essay at the beginning, and it's easy to get. And Father John Bear wrote a beautiful introduction to it. In it, he said these words: the plurality. Notice right away, you see this whole idea of multiplicity, right? The plurality into which each human being has descended, given over to a multiplicity of desires, reverberates in the plurality of multiple conflicting voices, each asserting itself. That's pretty well my whole talk right there. So let me read it again and then try to expand on it and explain my very limited understanding of what he's getting at. First of all, notice its plurality into which each human being has descended. We used to be in harmony. We used to be one by nature. We used to have one whole human nature back in Adam. But we've descended by sin into a plurality. Into a plurality of what? Well, he goes on, given over to a multiplicity of desires, not just the one desire for theosis, but a multiplicity of desires, all in conflict with each other. And then what does he add to that? The multiplicity of desires gives rise, or reverberates rather, which is a really great word, because reverberates is the idea of, well, in English, we usually think of reverberating as echoing, right? But the Latin word verberate, verberatus, it's what a teacher does to a student with a stick when they're misbehaving in a Latin school. Verberatus means to strike. So to reverberate is more like a drumstick bouncing on a drum, right? So yeah, there's that sonic element of it echoing, but there's also a physical element of it striking repeatedly. You see that? And so it reverberates. What reverberates? The plurality into which we've descended into a multiplicity of desires reverberates in the plurality of multiple. Now, hear these next 3 words: multiple conflicting voices. Now, had we had time right now for a pleasant little poll or survey, I might ask each of you, how many voices do you hear in your head in the course of a day or a minute? Right? I mean, I've got to the point in my life where I think people who don't talk to themselves are insane, because how else can you get these voices to shut up, or at least to be heard, right? You've got to somehow unite them. So when I read that, the first thought I had was all these multiple reverberating voices are right in there. I hear lots of voices talking to me, challenging me, driving after various things. But they also come from all around us, don't they? And here we are in an age with so much communications technology. Well, right now, here we sit on the internet, right? And how many of us have in the last couple of months maybe even watched more television than ever before, or listened to more podcasts than ever before? And are we hearing one voice, or are we hearing many? And are those voices all talking to one desire, Or are they coming after us in many desires? And are they trying to divide us? Or are they trying to unite us? Are they trying to bring about a harmony within our soul, which would be mental health? Or are they trying to create conflict between our desires, which would be mental disorder? And therefore, I would argue the root of mental illness. So here we are hearing and internally and externally multiple voices, a multiplicity of reverberation of reverberating in the plurality of multiple conflicting voices. Notice the last point, each asserting itself. Each voice rises up and says, I'm the one you should be listening to. Now, those of you who have multiple children get that, right? It's a perfect illustration of what I'm talking about. Each child desires his ownness, desires his own self to be the one that's attended to, desires the affection right now, desires the food. And there, all these different voices are coming at you all the time. Now, just by the way of analogy, think of each of those childs as a separate desire within your soul, rising up and asserting itself and demanding your attention right now. Feed me, mommy. That's what they're saying, right? Feed me, mommy. And how do you deal with it? Well, it's hard. It's hard. The soul is the seat of our deepest desires, and I think that's the crucial point, positively put. Can you see this book here? Is it too bright? This is the book that I'm not sure if this is the book that drove me down the path that I'm talking about now, but certainly it's had a very helpful influence on me. This is by Dr. Mary Ford. It's called The Soul's Longing, an Orthodox Christian Perspective on Biblical Interpretation. I love this book so much. I grew up Protestant. Many of you probably grew up Protestant. And in the Protestant world, I learned all kinds of Bible study techniques and Bible study methods. I had a book called Bible Study Methods, 16 different methods of Bible study. We learned Bible study as here's a text, here's how to study it, inside out. And to be fair, it involved a lot of prayer. It involved a lot of contemplation and meditation and worship. I don't remember ever being told that what drives Bible study is the deepest longing of the soul. That's really interesting. The deepest longing of the soul. That's what should be guiding your Bible study. The soul's longing. And I hope I'm gonna come back to that soon. But the basic point is that we have these 6 desires. But here's the crucial point about those 6 desires. They're God-given. They're not evil. They're not meant to frustrate us. It says in the Psalms that he gives us the desires of our heart. And I think there's at least 2 senses in which he gives us the desires of our heart. One is he put them there in the first place, right? He gave us the 6 desires I'm going to talk about. They're good desires. But there's also the sense that he gives us the desires of our heart in the sense that he gives us the satisfaction, right? He satisfies the desire. He made us so that we want food because he wants to give us food. You see? I mean, can you imagine how loving he must be to make food taste so good? Right? He didn't have to do that. He could have just made food all taste like cardboard, and we need it to survive, right? He didn't give us food to survive. He gave us food to tell us he loves us. And in the same sense, in a similar sense, the desires, the satisfaction of these desires is an expression of God's love for us. So this paper, this talk then focuses not on desires as something to destroy and overcome, but as something to nourish, to order, to discipline, and perhaps most of all, to orient. Because that's what I believe we need to do with our children's desires. We need to nourish them. In fact, I'm going to go so far as to say I think we need to arouse them. We need to arouse their desires. And having aroused them, we need to nourish them. And having nourished them, then we need to discipline them. But if you try to discipline something that's asleep, good luck. Or if you try to discipline something that's unhealthy, that's starving, good luck. First, we have to arouse the desire, then we have to nourish the desire, and then we have to discipline it. Now, I'm not going to be able to do that in this talk to describe in detail how you would do those three things, but I give them to you as that's maybe your homework assignment. The last thing then is, having disciplined them, then you have to bring them into harmony. What we do have to do, though, and this is what I want to focus on the most in this talk, is we have to orient them. We have to orient them toward their true end. Alexander Schmemann reminded us, a strong desire overcomes the natural limitations of man. It's a powerful statement. A strong desire overcomes the natural limitations of man. Well, what does he mean by that? He goes on. When he passionately desires something, he overcomes and transcends himself. The only question, therefore, is whether we desire the right things. So, my thesis, to state it one more time and then to get into the actual 6 desires. My thesis is this: if we hope to inspire our children with a vision for sexual purity, if we hope to cultivate in them mental health, and if we want to lead them toward the light of God, then we need to cultivate in them these 6 desires, and they are all driven by the one desire of union with God. Maybe another way to put it is, we must honor and cultivate their multifaceted but simple desire to know God. One desire, many facets. If I can use the word from Hebrews 1:1 and also the opening line in the Odyssey, these desires are polytropic. For those of you who know some Greek, that's a fun word, untranslatable. Polytropic. They are many, they're capable of many transformations. They're various, they're multi, but they're all one. They're protean, but they're all one. Okay, let me restate that in a little bit more detail as a transition into the 6 desires themselves. And I'll just tell you this because of the context, that I'm about to tell you the 6 desires, but I'm going to do it in a very clever, cunning, subtle way so that you won't hear what they are until I say, hey, I just said them. Did you notice that? Okay, that's what I'm going to do because I'm very clever that way. Ready? Okay. I'm kidding. Man, you guys who aren't from the Midwest and don't appreciate sarcasm, lighten up a bit, would you? All right, here I go. This is the whole statement of my thesis. The Holy Trinity has breathed into our souls a desire for theosis. This is a desire that can be refracted like a rainbow into at least 6 subordinate but interrelated desires, each of which ought to draw us to him. When those 6 desires are corrupted, either by excess or defect, our hungry souls go unsatisfied and our union with God dissolves. The perfect rainbow of our desires has been diabolically fractured, and as a result, our souls and the souls of our children are disoriented and confused. We must not forget that each desire is only a refracted ray of our desire for theosis. That is, a desire to know God, to be one with him, ruling as a kingdom of priests and free children, entering into his rest, shining like the stars in the heavens, where all of the blessed repose in life eternal. Now, for those of you who took up my hint and tried to track, you might have heard that I just noted the 6 desires. And here's what they are. We have 6 God-given desires: to know, to rule, to dance, to rest, to shine, and to live forever. So let's look at those one at a time. Again, with this is how I want you to absorb them if you're able in the time we've got. This is how I would encourage you to think about them. Each of these desires is good, and therefore you as a parent should arouse this desire in your child, and you should nurture it, and then you should discipline it, and you should harmonize it with the other desires. Again, I'm not going to talk about how you do that very much, but that's how you want to think about these. Because I'm going to deal with some controversies, I expect, on some of them. The first desire that I want to talk about is the desire to know. It was Aristotle who very famously said a long, long time ago, all men by nature desire to know. Now, it's important to think about what it means to know if we're going to say this. And what I don't mean is two things that are common in this world. One is to memorize lists, or to have what has become the general understanding of knowledge, which is that you stand outside something and you have an objective intellectual apprehension of it. We do like that. It is valuable, but that's not what Aristotle's talking about, and it's not what I'm talking about. The other thing is our world thinks of knowledge as ideology, sort of some certain things that you should believe so that you're okay, so that you're part of the tribe, so that you are a welcome member of this political movement or club or whatever it is. That's not what I'm talking about either. Although both of those things have a positive manifestation that follows on biblical knowledge, on true Christian knowledge. This is what I mean by knowledge, and this is what I believe our fathers and the church have meant by desire. Knowledge is the soul's perception of the essence of a thing. Now, all of a sudden, that got really crazy, didn't it? Really abstract. The weird thing about that is all that other stuff is what's so crazy and abstract. This is what a baby is born seeking. The problem is this is so basic that we don't have language for it except technical language. What helped me so much with this is St. Maximus the Confessor's books on, well, everything he wrote, but on knowledge. And he talks a lot in there about the logos, that everything has its own logos. I'm not going to pretend I understand this, but that's kind of the point, isn't it? If you know something, it doesn't mean you understand it. It doesn't mean that you have taken control over it. If you know something, it means you are in a right relationship with it. It means that you are relating to it according to its nature, and you are respecting it. Do you know that the first use of the word know in the Bible is when it's about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? That's interesting to me. The second use of knowledge, however, is Adam knew Eve, his wife. One of the many really horrifying modern updates of the Bible is when they say things like Adam had relations. The heck? Talk about useless. He knew Eve, his wife. And this is a key biblical concept that the author of Genesis intended to put up against the knowledge of good and evil. Do you see? There's one kind of knowledge that seeking it kills you. There's another kind of knowledge that gives life, is fruitful, brings new worlds into existence. That's what knowledge in the scriptures do. And what we want by nature, because God made us this way, is to know the nature, the logos of the thing that we're interacting with. This is why school tends to undercut knowledge in the modern world more than to give it. This is why homeschooling has been so effective as a response to that, because homeschoolers encounter reality. I can't tell you how many things I've read during the Corona crisis of people who have been forced to homeschool and their kids are happier Their kids are more independent. Their kids are taking on the world now. In the past, they would go to school for 7 or 8 hours a day, be guarded by the guardians, not be able to function like a human being, get false knowledge plowed into them all day, and then they'd come home and be stressed out. They sure didn't want to learn anymore. Now they can actually be children for 20 minutes a day. Imagine. So forgive me, I didn't mean to go that. But this is my summary of the point of knowledge. Knowledge is the soul's perception of the essence, or what St. Maximus identified as the logos, of the object of our knowledge. And with that perception, a right relationship. That's knowledge. That's what we want to arouse, discipline, and cultivate in our children. Biblical knowledge emphatically is always a relationship. I don't want to say there's not a single exception, but basically, biblical knowledge, the knowledge that the church has handed on to us, is emphatically a relationship. We all know this, for example, when we recite the creed in church. We're standing there in the church and we're reciting the creed because we know it, right? We know it. Well, we know it. Yeah, we know the words of it. But do you know it? Do you know him that it's talking about? Does the statement in one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church set your spine a shiver? Because if it doesn't, in that moment, there's more knowledge you can gain of that. Now, of course, with these bodies, we can't really handle too much knowledge, so the Lord is merciful and gives it to us slowly. But that's the difference. The difference between reciting and memorizing, which is so very valuable, and actually knowing the God of the creed, united to him. Okay, so modern approaches to knowledge waver between information and indoctrination, but I already talked about that. I do want to say this. Sexual purity, true sexual knowledge, involves a deep and essential knowing of the two people involved for each other. A knowledge that can only be given by our Lord, I'm going to argue, in the marital context. A child needs that general, I won't even say knowledge in the head, but that general apprehension that this is what knowledge is: relationship, perception of the inner essence. That should be something they experience in the household, so that when they are moving into a relationship with members of the opposite sex, that's just the context. That's the water. That's the expectation. It's not a philosophical conclusion. You see the difference? It's just the expectation. I will not enter into a relationship with a human being who is less than a human being. I will not take away the inner logos of this person in order to get my sexual appetite satisfied, right? That has to be secured long before the discussion of sex ever happens. And that's kind of the whole point I want to make about the sexual purity element of this talk, is all 6 of these desires need to be aroused, and they need to be nourished, and they need to be disciplined long before the child meets the member of the opposite sex that they want to be involved sexually with. You see, this is not a direct discussion about sexual purity. That follows, but won't mean anything if these things aren't put in place earlier. Okay, so knowledge. I'll go on to the next point now. The second desire, I will say this: the desire for theosis is, the desire for knowledge is only satisfied in the knowledge of God, the theosis, knowledge of God. But one of the properties or qualities of our knowledge of God is harmony. God is one, and he's many, but he's one. He is a harmonious being. Because he is a harmonious being, if I dare put it that way, when he made us in his image, he made us harmonious. And here's the thing: when we broke, when we shattered, we became exceedingly sensitive to harmony. And I'm gonna contend here that at every level of your child's being, from the time he was born, he has always been uncomfortable in the presence of discord. An example, an obvious one, is if you scrape a chalkboard with your fingernails. Okay? That's discord. It hurts. Another example would be when you're teaching your child math and he can't figure out the problem, right? Why? He can't figure out the problem. Another way to put that is he can't resolve the discord. He doesn't know that 33 times 22 is 660 plus 66 is 726. So he comes up with something like 720 and it's wrong. And it makes him feel terrible. It's strange how existential math is, how phenomenological. The child feels in his bones that something's wrong. So what does he say? I hate math. He doesn't hate math. He hates not knowing math. He hates not being able to resolve the discord. Do you see? I would go so far as to say that the main universal reason, the first essential reason for teaching our children how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide is for mental health. Because every time they solve a mathematical equation, notice the phrasing even, equation, two sides that are equal, harmony. Every time they solve a mathematical equation, they resolve a discord. And they bring peace to their own minds. And every time they do that, they have a very tiny experience, dare I say it, a very tiny analogical experience of the peace of God. That's what I think. That's the reason I believe children should learn math. What they learn then is that life and the world we live in can make sense. If they don't have to stick it out, if they don't have to figure it out, then an opportunity to discipline the desire for harmony has been lost. And worse, they have a portion of their mind has settled into the idea that there's this dimension over here in the world that either doesn't make sense or I can't make sense of it. And that means that the harmony that their mind is capable of attaining within itself and with the world they live in has just been undercut. I believe that God gave us math for the sake of ordering the mind and ordering our relationship to the world. But ultimately, I believe math is, call it an analogy, call it an allegory of the need for harmony in all things. And the wonderful thing about math is if you get it wrong, you can't pretend, right? Let's face it. It's not like literature where you don't have any idea what went on in the chapter, but you know how to write an essay. You can get yourself an A without ever reading. Good luck in math, right? That's important. So when I say dance, I'm using the term everybody wants to dance allegorically to speak of the soul's desire for all things to be one and for all things to be in harmony. I believe that every single, well, certainly the liberal arts is, perhaps some of you have heard me talk about the 7 liberal arts. I believe that the fundamental faculty or perception that the 7 liberal arts develop is the perception of truth or knowledge combined with the impulse toward harmony, even logic, right? How do you know that a logical syllogism is correct? Because you have two premises and a conclusion that harmonize. If they don't harmonize, you have a contradiction. Even in logic, it's a matter of music, you see, because God made a musical creation. So I'd like to talk a little bit anyway about the sexual union and how it's a specific expression of this union for harmony. I'll let you use your imaginations to explore what that could mean in terms of what kind of harmony does the church offer in the sexual union, because it's a beautiful high harmony that extends, and this is what I love so much about the harmonies the church offers us, all 6 of these fulfillments that the church offers us. It isn't just a matter of earthly satisfaction and meeting the need to satisfy an appetite, right? That's not it. It's that you're entering into a mysterious relationship, I would say a mystical relationship with another mystery, in a way that you can make new worlds. You literally are procreating, bringing a new world into existence. And within the marital covenant offered up to God and within the church, that new world that's being created becomes part of the kingdom of heaven, right? And so it's no longer just the nuclear family. It's the cosmic family. It's the heavenly household that we're talking about. And offered up to God the harmonies that we can attain and the unions that he gives us. Maybe most vividly expressed, most vividly expressed in the liturgy in that moment of consuming the body of Christ and being united with him, right? But I love that moment so much when we're singing the angelic hymn and we actually say and believe that we are laying aside all earthly cares because the king is entering. His affairs now are what take priority. The king is entering. And then we say these words, that we may receive the king of all. That we may receive the king of all. That's the harmony that we're seeking. And that's not just an earthly kingship. So that's all I'll say about harmony because of time. The third desire is the desire to rule. And here, probably the next two desires, I'm going to have to defend a little bit. You have a desire to rule. Your child has a desire to rule. Now that's good and that's bad because you both have a desire to rule and you don't always agree on who's ruling what when, do you? But this is my suggestion, that God gave us a desire to rule because in Genesis 1:1, he made man and said of them, let them have what? Dominion. Dominion. That means let them rule. Let them have dominion. And then we tossed it all away. So then the question becomes, should we seek to rule? My contention is yes, we should seek to rule. I'm going to even push it this far. We should seek power. Scary thought. However, the power that we should be seeking and the rule that we should be seeking is a very, very different power and rule than the world talks about. I'm going to push it all this way. The fundamental purpose of a parent might well be to teach the child how to take dominion. Let me illustrate practically. You have a 3-year-old child, let's say. Do you let your 3-year-old child play with the sharpest knives? Of course not. Well, now you don't do that because it's too dangerous. Okay. But that's not the only reason, because there's a reason it's too dangerous. The reason it's too dangerous is because your child doesn't rule those tools. If your child were to rule those tools, they wouldn't be dangerous. So what do? You train them. You teach them how to take dominion over those tools. At the dinner table, eventually you give them a fork and a knife. Why? Because now they can be trusted with it. More than that, because now they rule the fork and the knife. So you could make a very simplistic sequence to all of this, and you could say, when a child is very small, you give them toys. But you give them Duplos, big old plastic things, before you give them Legos, because they can rule the Duplo more easily than they can rule the Lego. Okay, practical point here. They're also inclined to leave their Duplo all over the place, which means they don't have dominion yet. They're not ruling them. They're being ruled by them. And therefore, what we need to do as parents is teach them how to take dominion over the Duplo by putting them away. Once they learn how to do that, then they graduate to a higher level of dominion. And you know this is a lot of Jesus' parables. He who is faithful in little is faithful in much. And of course, in this case, it's who is faithful in big becomes faithful in little, but that's a different meaning. So you have Duplo and then you have Lego. Then the child gets a little bit older and he's demonstrated that he can rule those things. The next thing is you give him something like, well, no, even before that, you make him rule his bed. You make him make his bed, right? Why do you do that? Not, as we are prone to say to our children, you're going to make me have a nervous breakdown. Sorry, mom. Sorry, dad. It's not about you. The reason you're teaching the child how to make his or her bed is because he is learning how to exercise dominion. Now, I think all of you would agree with this next statement, although maybe not as psychotically as me. But when I don't make my bed in the morning, I feel uneasy and I feel like my world's not under control. When I wake up in the morning, I feel dead. If I get up and I make the bed, put the pillows where they belong, it's such a tiny thing. But what have I done? I've said, I can do this. I can rule this. And it's ridiculous how much that changes my mood and my attitude for the day. That's why you teach your children to make their bed, because it makes them happy. That's why. Because it gives them, they can't be happy without a sense of ruling something. We are made to rule, and therefore we need to be taught how. Now, once you can make a bed, then you might be ready for a plant. Right? Now, notice this, the difference with a plant, it's alive unless you don't rule it. If you don't exercise dominion over the plant, it dies. And I would strongly encourage you to give your children, when they're 5, 6 years old, things that will die if they don't take care of them. And they would care about that. And then if those things die, you just let them die. You don't rescue them. You let them feel what happened because they didn't rule. I would even go so far as that as soon as they've demonstrated that they can handle a plant, then you get them a small animal like an ant. No, more like a gerbil or something like that. And again, you don't step in and constantly rescue the thing that's suffering under the child's neglect. Because if you do, they'll get accustomed to neglecting the things they ought to rule. And when they get older, it'll be people instead of gerbils. And then the world will suffer because your children didn't learn how to rule. Then I would get them a dog. And the fascinating thing, I hate dogs. You just have to know this as I make this point. I hate dogs. Living in the same world as a dog has made my life so much less happy than it could have been. But I made sure that all of that we always had a dog when the children were around, because I wanted them to experience, well, what I wanted then was just to experience the love that children have for dogs, because it's a sick and disgusting thing that every child should experience. I even liked my dog when I was a kid, but then it got taken away. So now I'm kind of suffering from neuroses from what happened to me. Plus, I got bit by a dog. Anyway, I hate dogs, but I recognize the value. And a child should learn that there's a higher level of ruling based on true love that has an unbelievable reward to it. But here's the thing about dogs. It is the nature of a dog that it cannot be happy unless it's pleasing its master. Have you noticed that? It needs to be told what to do. It needs to be trained. It's the child that should train the dog. The child should be the one to train the dog, and then rule it and govern it as much as possible. I don't want to be absolute here. I'm giving you principles. Then that child who has learned how to govern Duplo and Lego and crayons and his bed and a plant and a gerbil and a dog has most of all learned how to govern himself. And having learned how to govern himself, you can trust him when he's 17 years old and he's got incredibly strong feelings transferred from a dog to a girl. And you can trust him to know by now what it's like to enter into ever higher relation. And by the way, friendship is crucial in all of this too, because in friendship, you have an equality of dominion where you're not ruling the other, but you're constantly together ruling other things. And when one rises up against the other, the friendship is threatened. People need that before they enter into these male-female relationships. And that's what they need to have as by way of readiness to preserve and value sexual purity, is that kind of self-governance and appropriate governance of other things, to know that this mystery is not the same kind. And after all, isn't that exactly what the Lord taught Adam through giving him a bunch of pets? I need something different. So God's a good teacher. I highly recommend imitating him. Okay, so we need to give them give them dominion. All right, they have a desire to rule. We need not to resist that, but to arouse it, to discipline it. I'm sorry, to nourish it and to discipline it, and then to bring it into harmony. Now, for fear that I'm going to run out of time, which is of course going to happen, I'll tell you the next desire is the desire to rest, which might immediately put you in conflict with the last one. What do I want? Do I want to rule or do I want to rest? The answer is yes. Think of our Lord, Genesis 1, 6 days. He brings order out of chaos. And on the seventh day, having taken dominion, what does he do? He rests. And he loves that rest. He blesses that rest. And I've come to the conclusion in reflecting on this that I always misunderstood the command about the Sabbath day. I always understood, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, to mean on the Sabbath day, remember that it's the Sabbath and keep it holy. I've come to the conclusion that it might mean that, but I think it also means remember the Sabbath day, the first Sabbath day. Remember it and keep it holy by practicing it yourself. And here's what I think is so important about that. Our dominion is limited. That's the danger we fall into, is we don't want to recognize the limits on our dominion. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches the city, the watchman watches in vain. On that seventh day, we should not be taking any more dominion. For 6 days, we should be taking dominion over the world that God has given us to take dominion over. That might mean our farm, our garden, our work, whatever. It should be an appropriate taking of dominion. But on the seventh day, I don't believe we should do anything that exercises or takes more dominion. On the seventh day, we offer everything we've taken dominion over, we offer it to God. And we say, today, I rest in your dominion. Notice that. I rest in your dominion. Why is that so important? There's a million reasons, but one is because when we exercise our dominion, we're either going to do it in a state of rest, bringing his rest into the world, or we're going to do it in a state of fear and anxiety, bringing our anxiety into the world. And for us, I believe that the 8th day is the first day, that the rest comes before the work, that we should not even do the work unless we've rested first. We rest in his dominion, in his rest. And in his rest, we then systematically, in a Genesis 1 pattern, take dominion over what he has given us to take dominion over, and nothing more. Nothing more. This is why atheism leads to totalitarianism. You can't rest in God. So let's not us be atheists in the way we structure our lives. So that's all I'm going to say about rest right now, because I want to get on to the next desire, which is the desire, I said, to shine. The desire to shine. And here's where I get most anxious that I'm going to really stumble, cause offense. What I mean by this is very simple. I believe that your children desire glory, to be glorified, and that they should. Do you see how that could be so easily controversial? I would never do this for my own glory. Yeah, but some of you might have read this very morning, John 5:44. It was on some of the calendars for today. What does Jesus say? What is the reason that Jesus gives for the Pharisees and the Sadducees not to be able to believe God, to believe in him? He says, you do not believe. He actually questions them. How can you believe, he says, in what sounds like a non sequitur? How can you believe when you seek honor that comes from men? Instead of, please don't miss that, instead of the honor that comes from God. In other words, do you know why you believe what you believe? According to what Jesus is saying here, because of whose honor you want, because of whose well done you want, might be a better way to put it. Who do you want to pat you on the back and say, nice job? Who do you want to smile at you? I'm prepared to argue that almost everything we do as human beings is to get the people we respect most to smile at us. And this starts when we are babies looking up into mommy's eyes. That first smile that a mother gives the child is a world-creating smile. And when it's not there, it's a world-destroying grimace. We will do anything to get the approval and the honor and the recognition of those that we love and respect. That's because we're supposed to. That's because what our Lord wants is for on the day that we end our creed with, that portion of the creed, when we say he will come and judge the living and the dead, on that day, we don't want to be ashamed, right? I don't want to stand there in the presence of the Holy Mother of God and in the presence of all the saints, in the presence of the martyrs from Russia, in the presence of our Lord himself, in the presence of 10,000 upon 10,000 angels. I don't want to stand there in front of our Lord, naked and exposed, and all of them see the truth about who I am. I don't want to be ashamed on that day when there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. I want to hear the words from him. Well done, good and faithful servant. That's honor. You ought to want that. Because to want that from him will drive you to seek union with him. Will drive you to rest in him the way Mary did, sitting at his feet instead of being anxious and worried about many things. He holds that promise out to us, that if we humble ourselves in the sight of the Lord, he will say, that's good that you did that because you deserve to grovel. Except he doesn't. He says, humble yourself in the sight of the Lord and he will lift you up. And I shamelessly tell you right now, I want him to lift me up. I want him to seat me in the thrones next to. See, this is the thing about even James and John when they're arguing, the apostles are arguing who's going to be the greatest. Jesus doesn't say to them, really interestingly, he doesn't say to them, you shouldn't care about that. What he says to them, if you want to be the greatest, then you should learn to be the servant of all. He tells us how. You've got to, this is why all of this begins and ends with the fundamental point that it's theosis we really want. There's two kinds of glory, is my contention. There's two kinds of glory. One is, I'll use a fancy word. There's ontological glory, which is to say the glory of my being. I am what I was made to be. Okay? And then there's relational glory. That's the glory of someone loving me and approving of me. You might, if you like, you can think of one as glory and the other as honor if it's convenient. They're both real. I want to be what God made me to be, and I feel so frustrated standing before you right now and having nothing more to offer you but this. Do you know how much I would love to be what I'm supposed to be as I talk to you? And I also want so badly to hear our Lord say to me, well done. And I want my wife to say it. Your children want to hear you say it. And if you don't arouse and nourish and discipline that desire for glory, they will seek it somewhere else. And if they find it hard to get a well done from you, they will get it somewhere. And if you want them to go through the sexual challenges when they're late teens, mid to late teens, then make it really hard for them to know when you're going to say well done and when you're going to make them feel ashamed. Do you see? We want glory because God created us for glory. And the last thing that we want, and I don't have time to go into it, but I'll just simply point this out. The last thing that we want is for that glory to last forever. I always like thinking about the song at the end of Titanic, how you live in my heart, I think is the word. You live in my heart and my heart will go on. And the very first time I heard that song, my initial instantaneous thought was, that's not going to do me a lot of good. So what? I mean, I'm glad you're going to remember me, but I'm going to be dead. Do you realize that our Lord promises us eternal glory? Abiding in his presence in the rest of the saints forever and ever? Becoming ever more like the infinitely better God through all eternity? Being transformed from glory to glory by gazing on Christ? That's what he has, that's what he holds out for us. Your child wants to live forever, doesn't want to live broken forever, doesn't want to have that stereotype sitting on a cloud playing the harp forever. Although, have you ever sat on a cloud playing the harp, I'd like to know? But he wants to be glorified forever. You can hold that promise out to him. And the thing about it is, we end our creed by saying, I wait for expecto in Latin. Specto, we get spectate from that. I'm watching out for. I'm watching out for the resurrection of the dead and the life of the age to come. The most exciting thought about that for me is that we already can live the first fruits. No, that's not the most exciting thing. That when we get there, that's the most. But we already can live the life of the world to come. Paul says, as God raised Christ from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so, we also should walk in newness of life. We've already been given the new life. We already can demonstrate to our children that resurrection life is something we can live here and now. It's the life of a martyr, right? It's the life of a person who already possesses everything, so doesn't care about losing things. It's the life of death to self, but it's a deep, deep resurrected life in which the joy of the Lord is our strength. Not because we cheer ourselves up with pep talks, but because we're united to God. It's not psychological, it's spiritual. So what I want to offer you is an awareness, a clearness of understanding that your children, they want to live forever, and they want to be glorified, and they want to be at rest, and they want to have dominion, and they want genuine knowledge that harmonizes, and they want all of those things to be united in the one ultimate satisfaction of our soul, which is theosis. That if you can raise your children arousing, nourishing, and disciplining these desires and orienting them toward union with God, I can confidently say that if we exalt and glorify Christ in the lives of our children, the Holy Spirit, the angels, and the saints will multiply the weakness that we offer, and we will see miracles. We will see ourselves transformed, and we will see them transformed. I believe this. I've seen this. And so I offer you this as something I don't understand, but I believe, and therefore I spoke. I hope you'll forgive me for not being what I should have been today. I hope you'll forgive me and pray for me, because I really want so much to be like Christ. I want so much to attain to that glory. And I'm confident that if you'll pray for me, it'll happen sooner. So please do. And with that, I think I probably was supposed to have ended about 40 minutes ago and opened up for questions. So David, you tell me, is there time for questions, or have I abused the clock and it's all over now?
I think we have time for a couple of questions, as long as your responses are, within reason.
Yeah.
If anybody has any questions, you can post them in the comments and we'll pass them along, just a couple of them.
Elena, thank you. Unending fame, yeah.
Yeah.
Those are some good comments on there. Only a son can say that, yeah.
If there's no questions, we can close. I'm sure you can also contact him if you want to have any further conversation.
Please. please. Yeah, you can. Some of you might know about the Cersei Institute. You can learn more about what we do if you want to visit our website. As far as the transcript, I can tell you that this was recorded, right, David?
Yes.
But also, there is an article. This is a concise summary, you might say, of an article that's going to be published. Oh my goodness, St. Tikhon's Journal, I think. And it's this talk expanded. Are you saying the emphasis needs to be on our salvation first? I think that's a good way of putting it. The emphasis needs to be on union with God first, and in the middle, and last. That at every when you arouse and nourish and discipline these desires, it's always in light of salvation. It's always a small part of each day, just a small, tiny little piece of praying for and working out our salvation. The talk I did at St. Tikhon's was last September, I think. They don't have me scheduled to come up again in the near term. But I do want to highly recommend this book that I mentioned earlier, The Songs Longing, which is by Dr. Mary Ford, who's up at St. Tikhon's. Oh, how many services that they should be in all that they can handle and more, because what happens within the liturgy, what they're thinking about, the younger they are, the less that matters. When they're little, they need to be experiencing the love of the church. They need to be sitting in the presence of the bride while she sings to her groom. They need to be watching other people and worshiping with other people, because at first they'll just imitate that, but gradually what they imitate will drip into their souls. Well, David has a son, Jeremiah, who's just a blast to watch in the liturgy, because what is he now, 6? Is he 6 yet?
He's 7.
7.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he's 6 yet.
They disappear on us too fast. But you should see him. He looks like he's going to be a priest, and he's following along, and he's reading, and he's into everything. And who knows? Maybe when he gets older, it won't affect him the same way aesthetically. But that doesn't mean that the things didn't sink in deeply. He might become a musician instead of a priest. Would that be bad? Of course not. It would still be the food that he drank or ate as a child, absorbed into his soul. And I think that's what's most important in the liturgy, especially for all of us, is simply to put ourselves in it and to live it for that hour and a half or so. Because to my mind, the liturgy is the entirety of our spiritual journey reenacted over and over and over again.
The other day, Jeremiah asked me if policemen have to be married, because he knows archbishops can't be married, and he wants to be an archbishop, but he also might want to be a policeman. So he have to be married, then it's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
But there was one question here you might want to answer as we go. Father Noah's up next in about 21 minutes, so we should probably call this the last one. Let's see, where was it? Do you have a list of resources? Maybe you could write a blog post or something on this for retraining our minds to think about knowledge in this different, more biblical / salvific way.
Yeah, thank you. Wow. I think that the most help I got on it, as I said, was being able to read 1 or 2 chapters on knowledge by St. Maximus, which is so hard to understand, but that's part of it, right? You just wrestle with it and absorb it. But I think this book, again, The Soul's Longing, is very good on thinking this way. I don't know that it necessarily uses the same language, but I think it's dealing with the same matter. Let me say this, that at Cersei, we have something we call mimetic teaching, and it's meant to be a pattern in the form of Christ, if I can put it that way, and I think you'll understand what I mean, where teaching itself is incarnating a logos, in the Maximus sense of a logos, and it becomes a form not a formal, not a formalism or a method or a technique, but it becomes a form within which you can cultivate this habit of thinking by doing it with them, no matter what you're teaching. You can teach math this way. You can teach literature this way. You can teach really anything you want. And basically, it's got two main elements, which is first you figure out what is the logos of this lesson, and then you find out how am I going to incarnate it. Or maybe you start with an incarnation such as a fable or a fairy tale, and then you say, well, what logos might they draw out of this? And so in either case, you're going from incarnation to logos, or if you like, from type to truth. And it's very much the biblical pattern. So this might sound cheap and unfair, but watch how God teaches in the Bible. Really, watch how God teaches. Why did he use parables? Look at Genesis chapter 2. Why does God have Adam name the animals? I think everything you need to know about teaching is in Genesis 1, 2, and 3. Everything. And the rest of the Bible just sort of details it out for you. If you think about knowledge as participating in a relationship with another thing or being according to its nature, you see it all the time there. Oh, thank you. Oh, and so okay, so I have talked about mimetic teaching at previous Saint Amelia conferences. So it's very possible that some of you have had to endure it, or could even give a more concise answer to this question. I'm trying to think though of books that deal with it directly. It's something I've sort of abstracted or extracted out of 30 years of thinking about how does the Bible teach and how did the fathers teach. I mean, what I'm looking for is simplicity, right? I'm looking for something that is universal and simple. And that's what I find is that the pattern of going from type to truth is so simple. And it's so universal that we don't notice it. Every other method or technique or approach to teaching fits in there somehow. You can even reduce it to a glib little cliche. Show, don't tell. Well, I don't know why you'd say don't, but show before you tell. Give examples, right? On and on. Incarnate a logos, and this kind of thinking can take place. And then guide them through the contemplation of the logos that you're embodying in a thing, in an incarnation. You do it when you teach manipulatives in math. You want to teach your child 3 + 2 = 5. There isn't any other way to teach it, so you will. And then they will gaze on threeness and gaze on two-ness and contemplate 3 and 2 and what happens between them. And they'll see types, physical types of 3 + 2 = 5. Sorry, David, you were going to say something.
Well, I was just going to say we should probably wrap this up so we can leave and then turn the room over to Father Noah for his session on Mount Athos, I believe.